This is the first time that we've got really standardised attendance targets, and that's because it has been slipping so much since 2015 that we need to be aspirational but have them realistic as well, that we can do everything in our power to reach those targets. It's everybody's responsibility. First and foremost, parents and whānau have a responsibility to get their kids to schools. Schools have a responsibility about being one of the best places in town for young people to attend, but it's also wider than that. It's Ministry of Education, it's community. Some of the best initiatives that I have seen locally over my time in education have been where local communities have come together and acted as one and had no blame, actually come up with solutions that are localised, and that's what a lot of this is based on. It's evidence-based, localised solutions that will work in the local area.
You mentioned in the strategy, one of the things that mentions, or one of the actions that mentions, is highlighting the responsibility of parents to get their kids to school.
Yeah.
How will that action make a difference?
Well, parents need to understand how important education is in a young person's development, and that's one of the first actions that we're going to be doing, and first areas that we will be leaning into is an awareness campaign around what education means in a young person's life. Now, for some of us that might seem like that's self-explanatory, but not everybody understands the choices that will then give to those young people. What it will mean is if we can get parents on board, they will get their kids here every day, because in my time in education, I cannot think of any parents who didn't want the best for their children. They just have to understand what their part in it is to get their young people here. So that's the difference it will make, is having their parents and whānau on board.
What will that campaign actually be?
So that's been developed by the Ministry, the local regional Ministry of Education officers and the National Ministry of Education officers at this point in time. We're looking at going out across social media but also mainstream media as well, really looking at raising that awareness. And of course one of our ways that we will be able to measure that is by seeing how much parents understand it and have seen that campaign. So expect that to hit very soon.
There's some quite, I think it'd be fair to say, some quite broad actions in the strategy.
Mm.
Can you get a bit more specific? I mean, what specific things are we going to see happening in schools?
Absolutely. So it's hard to quantify it as one whole, because what I've said and what I hope that you understand from what you've seen here this afternoon is that localised responses work best. So each area is going to have their localised responses working with their local regional Ministry of Education officers. But they are evidence-based. And can I give you an example of something that we've seen working in the past that I've definitely have been part of? When I was a principal in Invercargill, and that's a wee while ago, Invercargill had some of the worst attendance rates at that time in the country. And the city came together and said enough is enough and we need to do something about it. So schools and businesses and parents and NGOs developed a localised action plan and strategy around how they could get their young people back into schools. One of the actions was as simple as shops not serving young people when they should have been at school. So coming on board and making that decision as a community was really important. It can be as simple as that. It could be that schools work together on employing an attendance person. It could be that a bigger school could have an attendance person within their school. In Budget 2022, we announced the $40 million Regional Response Fund, and in that fund, schools and local community areas will be able to develop their localised response and apply for the resourcing to support the engagement of the young people back in schools.
What are some of the big barriers to attendance that you've identified?
So it is a really complex area. There are a lot of barriers that there's not one single one that we can say that's a barrier, but we do know that poverty is part of the situation. We do know that transitional housing can be a barrier to attending. It has been exacerbated over COVID because COVID, of course, has meant that young people have become disengaged even more so in the schooling. There are a myriad of issues that we have looked at, and it can be regionally based as well. There might be different issues in regions. So some parts of the country over winter it is harder to attend. Transport, young people not having transport to get them to schools when it's particularly nasty weather outside in some parts of the country. So again, that goes back to why we need to have a regionalised response rather than saying a cookie cutter model and a one size fits all, which is something that as a former principal I'm absolutely passionate that we don't fall into the trap of having a one size fits all model. I'm also passionate about that we don't make it a totally punitive response in saying this is what's going to happen in a punitive measure if you don't get your young people to school. This is not a blame situation or a one sector group or one group's issue. This is an issue for the whole of the community, and the whole of the community needs to come together to solve it.
How did you come up with 70%?
70% was the initial figure that was when it started to decline in 2015. It was at 70%, but it's also the figure that was identified by the Education and Workforce Select Committee into their inquiry into attendance. And they said that 70% would be the initial first figure to get to, because that's the figure where it started to rapidly decline from in 2015. We didn't think that went far enough as a government, and that's why we've moved beyond that for 2026 and 2026 to move beyond that to 75%. We've got to be really aspirational here. We have an issue, we need to have the targets. I know from being a former principal that when there are targets, you will move towards reaching them. You come to a school like this one and they're already well and truly on that road, and they're already well and truly moving towards those targets. So if we can do it here and we can do it in many schools across the country, we can all do it.
Is 70% aspirational?
Well, it's 70% of, it's when the attending 90% or more. So it means that we're getting 70% of young people that are attending 13 out of the 14, or let's say 9 out of the 10 school days over the fortnight. But that's the first starting point. We want to go up from there. So that's the first place that we're getting to. And the fact that we're under 60% now, yes, it is aspirational, because we don't want it to decline, we want it to go back up, but we also want to put the right resources around our teachers, our schools, our parents to be able to support them in getting them back to that 70%.
How soon do you think you will see results, and what happens if schools don't meet them? Will there be sort of repercussions?
So the first and foremost, the target is in 2024, so that's our aim, is to reach it in 2024, given that we have been through some pretty tough times over the last couple of years. The idea is that we have our regional Ministry of Education teams now in Te Maho. Te Maho is the business unit that has been set up to work more closely with schools. This is Te Maho's first big project for them to work with schools. So when they are identifying that schools are struggling to meet that target, rather than once again let's have a punitive approach to this, let's get in beside and help and support those schools rather than the punitive approach. We don't want to make this something that schools can't reach. We want to say, what is it that will get them there and how can we get them there?
And, COVID, a lot of principals are reporting behavioural issues with people who've had their learning disrupted. Is the Ministry on providing mental health care for schools?
So we've got a lot in the way going in now into mental health. We've got the Counsellors in Schools program, plus we've just rolled out to the 5 new DHB areas, mana aki, that was announced in the last budget. But again, the Regional Response Fund is around engagement of young people back into schools, so that could be part of the solution as well. One of the factors that I'm very aware of is not to put too much onto schools when they have been through such tough times of COVID as well, and I know that they are very stressed in these tough times. So it's the right supports that need to go through, which is why Budget 2022 had $88 million overall around attendance and engagement in it.
The education of international students have always been largest fourth industry in New Zealand, which also brings a significant positive economic impact on New Zealand. But currently, the graduation and employment are quite unfriendly to international students, and the parents' resident visa has been cancelled by immigration. So these policies are becoming an invisible pressure to international students, and more importantly, they are unable to come to New Zealand right now. Does this mean the international students are no longer important to New Zealand?
Absolutely not. Our international students are incredibly important. In fact, my colleague, the Education Minister, has just this morning arrived back from an overseas trip around international students and international education. We see it as being a crucially important part of our education network going forward. There is some work that's being done in that sector. We announced a couple of weeks ago the opening up again of the international education area, and we are expecting young people to start coming back to our schools soon. And we've actually had quite a lot of interest as well. So we've had quite a number of people since we've made those announcements who have contacted about that. I love going around visiting schools and meeting up with the international students who are still here. I think they bring a diversity to our schooling situation that is important for our young people in this country. I think that goes towards the fun that is happening in schools. Our international students are a big part of that, and a big part of that global citizenship that we need to develop. So really looking forward to developing international. I think we've got an opportunity to develop international education even further in this country and make sure that it can be the best it can be.
And also, some private schools have reported to us that they have no international students for more than 2 years, and recently the NZQA will do external evaluation and review for them. May I ask, do you have any suggestions for them?
For those private schools?
Yes.
Yeah, it's to keep the conversation going, absolutely keep the conversation going. As I said, we have an opportunity to make it even better now, and if they want to be part of that discussion, then I would suggest that they contact Ministry of Education to be part of that discussion going forward. I think that there is room for it to be even better, as I've said. Okay, that looks like that's it. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.